It says we're live, but I'm not seeing it on my screen over here. If there is anybody who is seeing this the way they're supposed to, maybe you'll send us a message on the chat and let us know. But we'll proceed as if that is the case, and I'll say good morning. My name is Rinehart, and this is Toni Weisskopf. Toni is the publisher of Baen books, and I'm a contributing editor, also known as the Slushmaster General. And this is live slush on the 16th of May, 2018, the first of two sessions that we plan to do today. I see a message, a good morning message from Tom Monahan, so good morning to you as well, and we'll get started. One of the things that I want to do is just introduce what it is we're going to do today. And we're going to show you what happens to unsolicited manuscripts when they come into the office. Now, sometimes they come into the office, no kidding, through the mail. I won't show you the front of these because that would, you could zoom in and find out who's sending us stuff, and that might embarrass those people. We don't want to do that. But we get actually over 90% of our slush through electronic means, and that's the way we're doing these, although we did print them out so that we could use them for this event. I want to give a shout out to all of the people who volunteered their manuscripts to go through this process. When I did this as a workshop at a few different science fiction and fantasy conventions like LibertyCon and some others, we had people actually sitting in the room face-to-face is what we called it, face-to-face with the Slushmaster General, and I would read their manuscript, and they would hear me read it, watching me live, and everybody else sitting around. You know, it takes a bit of courage to sit down and bang out a manuscript. It takes even more to send it in, and it takes even a level higher to actually volunteer it for something like this. So kudos to all of our volunteers.
Absolutely, yeah.
So without any further ado, hey, good, we have Bias Mom and Nolan Tomlinson and some other folks saying hi. So hello to all of you out there, and we'll get into our first submission. The first one that we have here, first of all, let me hold it up, and you'll see that I have blacked out all of the identifying information. Once again, that's just to keep our volunteers a little bit anonymous. And the cover letter starts, Dear Toni Weisskopf. And this is good because this is someone who has done their research to know who the publisher of Baen Books is. I am submitting my novel for consideration by Baen Books. It is a 90,000-word urban fantasy novel. It is fast-paced, character-driven, and I think it would be a good addition to Baen Books' lineup. The story is about a war veteran, and it goes on to in the first paragraph here to tell us a little bit about the story. As for myself, I am a U.S. Army combat veteran, and that right there says, oh, we might have a pretty good expectation that this person is going to be able to convey what it's like to be in a combat situation. And since military science fiction is one of the things that we do pretty well, our authors are well known for that, we look for people who can do that well. Thank you for your time and consideration. That's a very good cover letter.
Absolutely. This is textbook what we're looking for in a cover letter. It's no more, no less. It tells us a little bit about the story. It tells us why the person's life experience applies to the story, and then it gets out of the way of the story. So very, very well done. And there's the correct use of an apostrophe in Baen Books, so that bodes well. So, so I am predisposed to like this one already.
All right. The next page we have is a blurb and a synopsis. And what I generally do is set that aside because the synopsis is not the story, and we really want to get into the story.
Yeah.
So with no further ado, we will begin with Chapter 1.
Now, question, is this how this person formatted it?
This is how this person formatted it. And so right there, we'll let you see that this person formatted it in single space, and there's no header at the top to give us title and page number so that if we throw the pages somewhere, we can put them back together. This is not what we consider standard manuscript format. Now, it's not an automatic rejection,
Nope.
primarily because with the electronic means of transmitting files and reformatting things, sometimes formatting gets lost. So we'll still read it.
Yeah.
I can't speak for other publishers as to whether they would look at this and just go, oh, you didn't follow the rules, you didn't follow directions. But our guidelines are pretty clear on what we hope to see in terms of formatting.
And there's reasons for that. The main reason why you want double spacing is so that you can make notes and editorial marks. And you're encouraging me not to do that, and that's not a good sign. The page numbers are also crucial. I print out the pages and I read them at lunch. They go in and out of my car. And if they get barbecue sauce sticking the pages together, or they get shuffled. Oh yes, that happens. Or curry sauce, whatever I'm having for lunch.
I've just occasionally dropped them and had to reassemble them.
Yeah, exactly. Wind blows, right? So we really do want those page numbers in there. But as you say, that might not be the author's fault, so I don't hold it against him. But it's a little. We don't have a point scale, right? This is all.
Not really. If it's standard manuscript format, I say, great, good job, thank you very much. If it's close, I say, hey, that's really good. If it's not, okay, it's not, but I'll still read it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but you want to make it easy for us to read it. All right.
And with that,
we read.
I'll read a little bit.
Okay.
If I get to the point where you're ready to say stop me. Otherwise, if we read probably 5 minutes worth of this and we haven't stopped yet, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Because what you want is for us to be enjoying the story enough that we want to keep on reading. And obviously, we have a few to get through in this session, so we're not going to be able to read you a whole lot of any of them.
But then again, we probably won't have to.
That's possible too, but hope springs eternal.
That's
I
true.
want every one of them to be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I am disappointed sometimes.
Well,
often.
that's all right though. But the point is that we are optimistically going into this with the expectation and the hope that we will be finding something that we can publish.
Yes.
So.
All
right.
Chapter 1. I should have known by guardian angel's cheerful demeanor that someone was about to die. It was a twinkle to his blue eyes, the curl of his lips as he smiled. My guardian angel practically glowed with excitement when death was imminent. But of course, as an angel of death, Sam tended to get excited when mortals expired. That made my life interesting, what with him being my guardian angel and all. Granted, I tried to ignore such hints. I didn't want to see death coming, just as I didn't want to have any more of it in my life. So I ignored Sam's cheerful composure as I cleaned the bar and poured Sam another drink. I didn't know if alcohol really affected him, but he enjoyed drinking and he tended to talk more freely when he drank. Only the finest bourbon, of course. He'd once told me he enjoyed the smoky, almost ash-like flavor. Death is a necessity, Sam continued our argument. I've seen people have all kinds of reactions when their time comes. Fear, anger, denial, regret, comfort, peace. You can't really base whether or not it happens on their emotional response. I knew I wasn't going to win, but I was still determined to go down fighting. If anyone had the knowledge about this, it was Sam, I knew. That didn't mean I wanted to agree with him. I mean, Sam went on, really, when it's someone's time, I think there's nothing more beautiful than a person taking that final step, easing off into their just rewards. I gave him a raised eyebrow. I don't think you're the most impartial judge of that. Sam gave me a smile that seemed to have far too many teeth in it. I suppose you're right about that. He had walked into that one, what with him being a certified angel of death and all. Sam, which was only my nickname for him, was a grim reaper. Death was his job, a job he took quite a lot of pride and satisfaction about. Still, there's many who welcome it when the time comes. thing is I've noticed that there are a few small punctuation errors here and there. Those are minor, not something that I'm going to worry about too much. There's a good bit of repetition so far.
Yep.
Angel of Death, Grim Reaper, some of that has...
Yeah, and I'm editing as I go. I can't help myself.
And if I weren't reading aloud, I would probably be doing the same thing.
Yeah, so we're still reading, but it's becoming harder and harder.
Now, at this point, actually, I might read a little bit more, but since we're trying to pack a lot into a short amount of time, I'm going to go ahead to the synopsis.
Yep.
Because the idea behind the synopsis is there a larger story here, perhaps beyond what we've read?
Yeah.
And in the synopsis, we hear that Ari is a combat veteran who has twice encountered the supernatural and come away from it with a great deal of emotional scarring. Ari is working as a bartender, his guardian angel, a literal angel of death, making his life rather difficult. He quickly becomes the center of a murder investigation after someone murders his boss in a rather gruesome fashion. No sooner does he arrive at the police station than it is attacked by a group of werewolves, which seem to be after Ari. He manages to survive and in the process meets Special Investigator Amanda Montenden, a woman who deals with the supernatural on a regular basis. She and Ari team up as werewolf attacks explode across town, and even Ari's guardian angel seems to think that the pair of them are doomed. Ari runs afoul of a church-sanctioned squad of demon hunters, as well as an armed madman who seems unable to distinguish the supernatural from his own paranoid delusions. Ari and Amanda manage to make peace with the church-sanctioned hit squad, only for Ari to learn that the werewolf threat is greater than any before seen. The werewolves are led by a 1,000-year-old werewolf king that Ari personally killed, who has somehow escaped from hell more powerful than ever. Now it goes on from there. Again, by dint of not having a lot of time, I'm not sure I'm going to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's very similar in theme to the Monster Hunter International series that we publish and to other things that I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's ringing some warning bells for me. And the warning bells are that it's an urban fantasy that we've essentially seen before. And the biggest warning bell of all is that it's a fantasy based on Christian ideas. And I haven't seen a lot of successful ringing of these changes on that. The heaven and hell, the demons and the angels. I think it's really hard to pull that off, and I don't think our audience likes it.
We've had a few sort of like that. I mean, Ringo had the couple of books, Queen of Wands, I guess, Princess of Wands.
Yep.
And so it's not that it's completely out of place.
But I think it's tricky to pull off and pull off well. There also doesn't seem to be a lot of plot to justify a novel-length story.
And that we wouldn't really know except for reading a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm not completely turned off by what I've read so far.
Correct.
If I had more time, I would probably read more to make a final determination.
Yep.
That's what you want
for
something like this.
I would too. So I would say yes. This is a set aside to read more later. Could go either way. The writing could be so much fun and so compelling that the framework that it's in doesn't really matter, or it might not quite get over the "we've seen this before" problem. So no final disposition can be made.
No, not yet.
Yeah,
not yet.
Okay.
Let's see. We do have a couple more people saying hello and one saying please talk to the mic a little bit more. So we'll try to make that happen. And one person responded, barbecue, to your reference of getting barbecue sauce on the thing.
There we go.
All right, so entry number 2. This one, as you'll see, did not actually come with a cover letter. There's the cover of the story and just says, "To whom it may concern, I hopefully submit and thank you for your consideration." And that's okay, because if you look at our guidelines, cover letters are not required. This one also sends us the synopsis in the front of the book, and that's fine. We'll set that aside. This one is a little better on the formatting, because you'll see that it is double spaced, and there is a slug at the top where the author's name and the title were and the page numbers.
Yeah.
But one thing that you might not be able to see, I'll actually hold it up a little closer, is that it's done in a sans-serif font, which reading a lot of sans-serif can be tiring on the eyes, and that's one of the reasons why we ask for a serif font like Times New Roman, or what's another one that you particularly like?
I like Book Antiqua.
Book Antiqua is one of my favorites.
Yeah,
Bookman Old Style also is.
Bookman Old Style is fine. Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at our books and you see what fonts our books are set in, you can, something similar to that makes sense. So.
All right. So, Chapter 1. A cheer rose up on the far side of the reception hall, momentarily drowning out the din of conversation and revelry. Ensign Elizabeth Chase looked over and saw Richard Ambrose surrounded by most of her fellow graduates, raising his glass of champagne and wearing a smile so broad it forced his eyes to narrow slits. A sea of white dress blouses, black tuxedo coats, and formal gowns in a myriad of colors were between her and them, but she could still see Ambrose clearly. Richard Ambrose's tall, muscular frame rose above those around him and most of the others in the hall. She saw Barney Goings and Turk Leitner with him, laughing and patting each other on the back. They were the top graduates of her fighter training class. Ambrose was a natural-born pilot, or a natural pilot and a born leader, whose position as the best in the class was never in doubt. He was her nemesis throughout training. Of course, punching him the first week of flight school might have had something to do with it. At least he had never asked her for a quick tumble in the storage locker again.
Which kind of, I don't know, I'm not getting enough detail. I mean, I'm getting details, but I'm not getting the kind of details that I need. I don't know how old these people are. I don't know if this is science fiction or if it's fantasy. I don't know where in time or where in space we are. There's not enough in that first paragraph to let me know that, and so I'm feeling disoriented, and that doesn't make me happy.
Now, that may be a case where a brief cover letter saying, "I'm submitting my science fiction novel," would at least do much the same as what a book cover would do, where you pick up the book and you know it's science fiction, so when you start it, you have that expectation.
Yeah.
This one is science fiction,
Okay.
and perhaps we'll get a little more in terms of detail.
Yeah. Okay.
Elizabeth twisted the stem of her full champagne glass, watching her classmates while standing apart near a 2-meter-tall potted plant by the entrance. Silver droplets of light danced on the blue tablecloths and gray flooring cast by the chandeliers hanging overhead. It gave the hall an almost liquid feel, as if the graduation was taking place underwater. The orchestra had stopped some time ago, but were again gathering near their instruments, promising another assault on her auditory senses. Now, right there, that's a little highfalutin language for me, but it's not altogether.
Yeah, again, there's lots of words here and there's lots of detail, but it's not quite the right detail. I mean, light doesn't actually drop by droplets. You can get an effect like that, but it's not a happy description. So.
I wonder if this is a case where the author is trying to take the larger view, the almost omniscient view, rather than getting right into the head of Elizabeth, because I don't know if she's the kind of person yet who would use these kind of descriptions, or is the author using those descriptions?
Yeah. So do
you want to go a little more, or should we jump to the synopsis?
Yeah, we can jump to the synopsis, I think.
Okay.
So,
The synopsis tells us that Elizabeth Chase is a native of Cerelia, an inhospitable planet where survival is a constant struggle. She is a product of selective breeding, beautiful and intelligent. She lived with her family of 5 sisters and her mother until marauders arrived to steal the valuable crystals they mined. 4 of her sisters and her mother were killed. Her oldest sister, Amanda, was taken away by the marauders. Elizabeth had been away at the time and returned to find them dead. In desperation, naive Elizabeth tries to find her stolen sister and is instead sold into virtual slavery on the amoral planet of Calypso, where almost anything can be had for a price. Now, what I'm seeing here is this is a lot of backstory in the synopsis, which is probably good that or maybe it's good that that's not where the story started, or maybe that's where the story should have started. I'm not exactly sure. But I am a little curious as to how someone goes from being sold into slavery to being
right.
a fighter pilot graduate.
Yeah, and she doesn't seem to have lost her naivete. I mean, what we're seeing in the first couple paragraphs is her yearning towards the big, strong, handsome fella. But there's no hint of any of this kind of traumatic background in her viewpoint. There's no sense of how did I get here from where I was, or so I think she's potentially an interesting character, but we don't get a sense of that in the.
I would almost go back as I just happened to move my pages.
Yeah.
There's a paragraph shortly after what I had read before that starts, Elizabeth hated crowds and had no desire to mingle into the press of classmates and guests. It felt too close, too familiar. That, I think, is possibly a better way to introduce her, because it gives us something about her.
It gives us something about her, yeah. And it gives us immediately a problem, right? And I like that. The reader is immediately given this sense of something's wrong.
Right.
Right? And it can be a little tiny thing. It doesn't have to be the whole thing of the book. In fact, it probably shouldn't be the whole thing of the book. But ideally, it will build into something more interesting. Line of doom here comes for me in the synopsis, where the next line, or a little bit farther down, the man she is sold to recognizes her beauty and intelligence and has plans for her. He allows her to attend a university where she learns computers, then farms her out as a model called Chantel to steal secrets for him. Reproduction on Cerelia is completely controlled by the state, and no one on Cerelia has sex to procreate. Really? I don't believe that. Most find sex a disgusting practice. Also, I don't believe that.
I don't know how many readers would relate to that.
Yes.
Or find it,
find it plausible. Yeah. You're not giving me any reasons why in the future this has changed. So I'm not. Yeah.
You're not predisposed to read any more of that one.
No, I don't trust it. So. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So.
All right, we did have a question.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, how quickly does a book have to grab your interest? And the way I'd like to talk to that is, imagine you're in a bookstore and there's shelves and shelves and shelves of books, and you only have $10. So of all of the shelves of books, you're interested in a whole bunch of them, but you can only buy one. How much of each one are you going to read before you decide which one you're going to spend your money on? It's a similar calculus, I think, in the terms of buying a manuscript, because we are buying a commitment to provide editorial work, to do art direction and produce artwork, and then to print books and to do all of those kinds of things. It's an investment.
And it's a promise to bookstores and to readers that this book is something that we really enjoy and we think you will too. So it is a big commitment on our part. And ideally, it's a long-term commitment. Ideally, it's something more than just one book. It's whole series of books and short stories and you know, sending your kid to college. So that's you know, that's what we're hoping to invest in this. So how quickly does it have to catch our attention? Really very quickly. We have to see that spark very soon. Now, music analogy, sometimes you'll have an introduction to a song that you don't really care about, but then the song is awesome. More often it's the other way around, right? You know, that
it grabs you right away.
That it grabs you right away, and then the song doesn't quite live up to the promise of the introduction. But that's why songs have them, is to catch your interest really quickly. That's why back in the old days, I don't know if they still do this, but comic books would have really incredibly spiffy covers, and then the person who did the interiors would be somebody entirely different in terms of artwork. But you want that initial draw-in. So long answer to a short question is really quickly. So.
And we had somebody comment about reading the first few pages and then reading in between and possibly reading the ending. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
On a couple of these I probably would, but sometimes just because there are other things that require our time and attention, we can't put that much into it.
If I care enough about it that I skip to the ending, then
that's a good sign.
That is a good sign, yeah.
And that's another way I think that the synopsis is your friend. Yeah. Providing a good synopsis helps me to see that there is a story that perhaps you didn't really grab my attention with your opening, because the story really starts in chapter 2. And then I can go to chapter 2 and start reading there and see if it gets a little better.
Yeah.
And with that, entry number 3. Yeah. We have another cover letter. Dear editors and first readers, below please find my 120,000 science fiction novel. I think that should be 120,000 word science fiction novel. I am a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America and have had short stories published. And then lists analog and stupefying stories and some other things that I've heard of. Thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing from you. And then there's a little bit of additional cover treatment, things of that nature. It's not a bad cover letter.
Yeah, but the
needed to be proofread.
Well, it needed to be proofread. I mean, if you're a member of CEFWA, you should know who the editors are, and you should address it to a person. And the ideal cover treatment, we have not gotten to that stage. No,
but it is something that we sort of ask for in our guidelines. We invite people to tell us what their ideal cover would look like.
Do we? All right.
I'm not sure exactly why, but it is on the online guidelines.
All right.
Someone says, how long is a good synopsis?
And that's
long enough to tell us the whole story. This one is 3 pages, 2.5 pages, single spaced, which may be enough for that particular story.
Yeah.
Probably 4 is a good ballpark to shoot for. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Too much longer than that, and
it's too long, but 1-page synopsis is always too short.
That's a good way to look at it.
I mean, if you're writing a novel, we want a little more detail. And the other thing about a synopsis is that it should tell us how the novel ends.
Yes.
It shouldn't say, and if you want to know how it ends, I hate that.
It should tell the complete story.
It should tell the complete story. And the reason why we need it to know the complete story is because endings are tricky. And a lot of times, if a novel has passed the initial stage and we're reading it, the reason for rejection will be an unsatisfying ending. That the characters will be there, the setting will be there, but for whatever reason the story does not conclude. So the synopsis shows us that you in fact know how the novel ends, and that it does have an ending, and I want to know that. So,
all right, we're going to read a little bit of our third volunteer entry. Now this one had a little thing at the front that sort of looks like poetry and epigraph kind of thing, and I generally skip that because I want to get to chapter 1, which is what this is. Yeah. Again, formatting here is very, very good. It's very easy on the eyes.
Yeah.
Okay. We do know it's a science fiction novel from the cover letter, so we have a certain expectation going in. Chapter 1. There were times he wished he could do less than his best. That way, he could pretend he didn't have his tablet computer phone with him, or that he couldn't hear the ringtone peculiar to only one person, or deliberately misunderstand the summons to the loading dock. Noah that's a long name, and I'm going to skip it. Noah's stomach clenched, threatening to bring up his meager evening meal. He stared out the narrow, wire-reinforced glass window at the black, unmarked Gmod Earth government air car, coldly reflecting floodlights aimed at the landing apron. A brutal Arctic cold front had rolled over the Voyager's Gray Wolf Reserve and Institute, and it appeared that it had brought the air car with it. If Noah was not honest with himself, he'd been expecting the summons for the past 2 weeks. Paul Andreasen, the Institute's security director, had predicted that it would be clandestine, saying, "Sandoval won't want true Powell Lee to know that they're going to promote you over him." Even so, it was a surprise. Noah turned away to the mudroom, bundled into his parka, mittens, and boots, then slipped through the door into the winter night. He waited, puffing clouds of gelid. I don't know that word. And I would probably go look that up to see what it is.
Yeah, I know the word, but I don't think I've ever said it, so I have no idea how it's pronounced. Yeah.
Moisture. He'd last seen the temperature at -25°C. It was colder now. He stood motionless in the cold for 5 minutes. The door of the car closed. Finally, he muttered, "Cloaks, daggers, and mystery," and turned to go back in.
Now, you've experienced serious cold.
I have. This actually, we had mud rooms, and you hung your parka up when you went in the building, and you got it out again when you left. And the hairs in your nostril would freeze and crinkle up and kind of tickle.
Okay. The motionless is what got me there.
It would be difficult to stand motionless in that kind of cold for 5 minutes, but if you really didn't want to, I mean, you could sort of stand and shiver a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
In the silence, he heard the lock activate and the door swung up. Hesitating, he then ducked inside, sliding across expensive alpaca wool upholstery as the door closed behind him. He'd no idea the car had lifted until it banked and he saw lights limning the Institute overseeing the reserve, 2 million hectares of reclaimed wilds. The Institute was a museum, giant display habitat, classrooms, and quarters for staff and visiting researchers situated on the southern edge of the reserve. The light seemed to float unmoving for a moment, then suddenly streaked past and vanished. His insulated coverall was permeated with the faint Christmas scent of white pine resin, the musk of sweat, and the odd sweetness of clot snowmobile oil. Noah leaned back, savoring the smells of home. He noticed his knee bouncing and held still only with effort. Now here, if he held still only with effort, I'm a little surprised about his holding still with seemingly effortlessly earlier, but that's a minor kind of thing. I like the sensory details in here and the fact that it puts me in a place and lets me vicariously experience what this person is doing.
Yeah, and names matter a lot to me. So I like the fact that the Klotz snowmobile oil. That's nicely done. So does he need to be naming a brand name of motor oil?
I don't know.
That I don't know yet. Yeah. So
I would probably keep reading this.
Yep.
And by virtue of saying that, I don't know that I need to go back to the synopsis right away, especially because it is a 2.5-page synopsis and we would never get through it in a short little show. Yeah. We're coming up on the 40-minute mark, it looks like. So, or possibly a little bit less because I started our stream here a little earlier than the stream that's going out. But we do have a few more to get to. Anything else about this one that you want to?
Yeah, I would. author is in love with semicolons where commas would do, so got to watch out for that. Looks like a murder mystery, so yeah, I would definitely, I would probably keep reading and take a look at the synopsis.
And
so
that's what you want out of
yeah.
a very short look like this. So,
Yep.
good job. We have another question. How negotiable is word length for a novel? Will you toss manuscripts below a certain word count, even if they catch your interest?
Yes. Short answer.
In fact, can I give an example?
Yeah, go for it.
Just late last week, early this week, I spent some time going through very, very recent submissions that came in electronically. Mm-hmm. I go through them and weed out those that are clearly, we had someone who submitted a short story. We had someone else who submitted a novella, which was only 20,000 words long.
Yeah.
Granted, our guidelines say we prefer between 100 and 120,000. I generally don't even make note of it if it's between 90 and 130,000.
Yeah.
If it's far longer, I'll just make note of it. I'll still read the opening. If it's much shorter, I'll make note of it and still read the opening. But a novel, according to the industry definitions, is 40,000 words.
Ooh.
So if one is much less than 50, I'm probably going to look at it quickly and send it back to the author with a note that says this is a very short novel and we're not looking for that.
Yeah. Now we do have markets for short stories. We have 2 contests that we run every year. One is the Jim Baen Memorial Short Story Contest that we do with the National Space Society, and it's for hard science fiction, near future, near space. Well, it doesn't have to be near space, but it does have to be near future. Mm-hmm. And we also run the Baen Fantasy Adventure Award, which is for fantasy stories. And both of those are closed right now, but they'll be open again, and just check the website for that. So we do have open markets for short stories that you don't have to have you don't have an agent to submit to these. You can just send in the stories. And we do pay professional rates and publish the winners. And you also get a nice trophy out of it as well. So we do have markets for that. If you have a short story, feel free to send those in, but not for the novels.
And unfortunately, I felt really kind of bad because one person had submitted through the electronic slush for the Fantasy Award contest, but I didn't get to it in time before the award closed, and so I had to write them back and say, you used the wrong portal, and unfortunately, the award is no longer accepting submissions right now.
Right.
And that hurt because I try really hard to get some of those shorter ones that I know are not going to fit for us processed quickly. And in fact, the most recent one I did was, I think, submitted 2 weeks ago. Okay. So those we handle pretty quickly. But since we get 100 plus submissions a month, the others, we have a backlog, and we're still working through that.
Yeah.
And speaking of a backlog, we have another one.
Okay.
Now this one, I printed this out, and I don't know that it'll show up very well. It might actually work better with your copy here. I'm going to hold it up in hopes that the camera will catch that this, when it printed out with the comment bar. Yeah. Because the authors had left the comments on in sending in the submission. This happens actually quite a bit, and it's sometimes amusing to see what comments were still in there. I think it sometimes might be embarrassing to the authors to know that some of the comments were still in there.
Yeah.
It's just something to check on when you're going to submit your work. But this cover letter is a little bit long, but it gives us, tells us what the book is. Dear Baen editors, I'm not too jazzed about the way it begins because it begins with a lot of sentence fragments to kind of catch our attention. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But there's mention of an amulet and a corpse in the character's building. And then says it's an 86,000 word urban fantasy set in the Shenandoah Valley.
That's fine.
That's great, and it tells us a little bit about the authors and the fact that they are familiar with the area. Says that perhaps we'll get something that has that local color and it comes across as authentic.
This looks like it's a collaboration between two people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true.
Okay.
So then they submitted 1, 2, 3.5 page synopsis. So that's probably a good length.
Yep.
If the story is relatively complex.
They are
And
really in love with that tagline.
yes, they did use it on the synopsis as well. And
I am not in love with that tagline. Okay. Dealing with your worst ex. Yeah. Okay.
so,
On to the story.
Chapter 1, Sunday Evening. A knock on the door pulled my attention away from the emails I was sorting through for the day. My brows lifted in surprise at the visitor standing in my doorway. Dark eyes met my own, and it took every bit of willpower to keep me from admiring the way his designer clothing fit his body. Designer clothing, I might add, that he wore with the same ease most wore jeans and a t-shirt.
Yeah, see that's designer clothing is not specific enough. I mean, jeans can be clothing. I mean, so
Can be designer.
can be designer exactly. So it's a little imprecision that gives me a warning. So
And specificity here, at least in terms of, is it coat and tie? Is it a blue blazer and a t-shirt?
yeah, here is the place where you want to be specific. So yeah.
His face was elegant and had aristocratic features which fit his 6'3" frame perfectly. That, to me, is maybe a little too specific, but that's a personal thing, and maybe that's because I'm not nowhere close to being 6 feet tall.
Or a girl, so women pay attention to stuff like that.
Thankfully, unlike most people, I wasn't intimidated by his height, stature, or handsomeness, or his reputation.
Now, I think you're supposed to think she protests too much here, and that's a nice touch.
Okay.
Yeah.
The consigliere, I said. To what do I owe this dubious pleasure? Dubious? The consigliere's honey-smooth baritone voice carried across the room. You wound me, Lady Catherine. I am here on good business. That's Ms. Wolfe to you. Good for you. Good for whom? I said, through gritted teeth that I hoped looked like a smile. If you've ever tried to say things through gritted teeth, it doesn't really work very well, so I'm not too keen on that.
Yeah.
For all parties, naturally. Naturally. What else could it possibly be? I drew a breath and let it out slowly as he entered my office, allowing the door to shut with a soft whisper behind him. The man, without a doubt, was handsome and immaculate, from his brown hair to his loafered feet. He could have been a model for Men's Fitness or even a Chippendales dancer. There was sensuality to his movements, and he exuded confidence. We moved in similar circles, and his reputation preceded him wherever he went. Though admittedly, where I was spoken about in cautious whispers, his name was spoken aloud and typically in awe, if not longing. And yet we don't know his name because he's only been referred to as the consigliere.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of non sequitur in this, from the description suddenly to we moved in similar circles.
The paragraph structure is not correct, basically. We're not, the sentences that should be together are not together, and sentences that shouldn't be together are together. So at that point, I would probably
Turn to the synopsis and see what this is about.
We're hitting another one of my pet peeves here too. Wolf is spelled Woulfe, which I have never seen in the wild. That doesn't seem like a normal spelling. Well, on the other hand, approaching her 4th century on this planet and plane of existence, right? So maybe it's supposed to be weird.
It's archaic.
Yeah.
which would be appropriate for someone
Okay, so,
nearly, 400
all right.
years old.
So the spelling is telling me something, and that's useful.
Anything that jumps out at you?
Well,
Would you like? Should I read some of this to the listeners?
There's some misspellings here in the synopsis. But what I'm wondering, and I won't really know until I read more, is that right now this feels more like a romance than a fantasy. That the interesting
Paranormal romance, as
yeah,
it were.
yeah. That where the interesting part of the story is the interaction between the two characters who are going to be romantically related, and not the consequences of the fantasy elements. And I think, to me, that's what the difference is between paranormal romance and urban fantasy, is that where it could be, urban fantasy can and often is a romance plot, but the interesting things about it are not so much the romance as the world building, and the themes of the novel. And for paranormal romance, where the fun is in the romance, and less about the cool and sense of wonder-inducing world building. So I wonder if that's what that is. And we do urban fantasy, not paranormal romance. So
just
yeah, and I won't know.
Maybe a good story, but it may not be.
It may not be
a
the
Baen book.
right kind of story for us. Yeah.
But we'll have to read more to really find out,
Yeah.
especially in the synopsis. We'll need to dig into that.
Yeah.
All right. This would be entry number 5. Very short letter. And in this case, this is one where, rather than being incorporated into the file that was submitted, this was put in the comment section of the electronic submission portal, and that's perfectly fine because it conveys the information. My only issue with it, it tells us, no, actually it does. I was going to say it didn't tell us how long the story is, but it does. It's got it right in there. It says it's an urban fantasy, 78,000 words, and it's about an Army veteran and blues guitarist named Rose Allen Lee. And since I enjoy music, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what this is about.
Yep.
Again, we have starting with a synopsis, and that's good. This one is about a page and a half.
Ooh.
That may be a little short to tell us everything that happens in the novel, but it's only a 78,000 word novel.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that. Well, just don't hold that up to the screen.
There we go.
Chapter 1. Rose Allen Lee cursed and slammed on the horn and the brakes at the same time. The back of her ancient station wagon slewed around, and she struggled to regain control of the unwieldy beast. A howl erupted from the back seat as the concrete abutment of an overpass grew larger and larger, Rose's nearly bald tires slipping and hydroplaning despite her best efforts to stall her slide. The car slowed just enough so that the resulting dent from the collision would be noticeable, but at least her front end remained intact. Rose remained frozen in the driver's seat, hands clenched around the steering wheel, heart pounding with the adrenaline burst left in the wake of what could have been a much worse accident. "Holy crap, Frank," she drew a shaky breath. "What the hell was that?" From the back seat, Frank growled, a weird sound from the usually easygoing basset hound. The growl ended in a whimper as he dove back into the pile of dirty laundry he'd been snoozing under. A horn blared outside the window, fading away.
Now this is a nice start, right?
I'm
yeah.
The amount of detail is good, and it is unusual enough in terms of, okay, it's not a Rottweiler, it's a Basset Hound. There's dirty laundry in the back. These are good
the details are the telling details that we need to know, right? So it's not just a station wagon. We know exactly how that station wagon feels, and she doesn't tell us how it smells, but we know how it smells, right? Okay, we get that.
We can imagine.
It smells like wet basset hound and dirty laundry and maybe oil stains, and we get all of that from what she's given us just in that first page. It's also got a nice voice to it. You know, it feels. It has the informal tone that is often helpful in an urban fantasy. So, you know, we don't know yet exactly what time period we're in, but we're about to, right? I see that there's we're about to get a timestamp. So yeah, so far, check. It's pleasant and good.
Yeah. A horn blared outside the window, fading away as the pissed-off driver passed under the bridge. Belatedly, Rose realized the engine was still running and the back of her 1982 Ford Country Squire wagon was sticking out into the first lane of traffic. She threw a one-finger salute at the other driver, then put her car in reverse, backed up, and pulled forward to get out of the way of traffic. With a quick glance in the back seat, she made sure that Frank and her Fender Telecaster were both in one piece. I definitely would continue reading in this.
Yeah.
It seems as if it's going to be fun.
It does.
And when I read the first bit of the synopsis, where fairy creatures run Rose Allen Lee off the road, slash her tires, and sabotage the first rehearsal for a big gig she's landed with an up-and-coming blues singer, that's different.
Yeah.
And we've done some things that combine music and science fiction, and some things that, you know, so music and fantasy is a good mix. The Fae's machinations drain her bank account of her last $20, endangering her ability to finish the musical tour and bring her to the attention of Montaigne, the last magician.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of character torture, well done. You know, so yeah, this one looks very promising. Now, in the synopsis, we see that the character has years of training in martial arts followed by military service. If the author has any experience with martial arts or military service, or comes from a military family or anything that lends me any kind of belief that you know what you're talking about, that should have been in the cover letter. That would have been a useful thing to have been in the cover letter. Good point. But it doesn't have to be there, and if you don't, then you shouldn't make it up. So I just have to rely on how well she tells the story to see if I believe that she really does know about martial arts or military culture, because these are things that our readers know about.
And they will call an author to...
Thomas, I'm looking at you. So yes. So we know our audience, and we know the kind of things that they will stumble over if they can't believe in the authenticity. So yeah, very promising.
Definitely would read some more of that.
Yeah.
All right, this one's entry number 6. Dear editors, I'm excited to introduce my novel for possible publication at Baen. This novel is the first of my urban fantasy series that is Blackish meets supernatural and novels like Dead Like Me. And those are some kind of things that I haven't seen put together, so that has some interest to me. Yeah,
I mean, the author is assuming that we know TV shows, but sure, why not?
Well, I'm familiar at least with
Blackish and supernatural. So yeah, okay.
And then we find out later on it's set in the Triad of North Carolina in an urban city. It is approximately 65,000 words long, and it is similar to the Vampire Hunter series.
Right. She already made comparisons above. I'm assuming it's a she. The author made comparisons above in that first line, so maybe too many comparisons, but yeah. And they've let us know their short story.
Yes. So this author is one with whom we are a bit familiar, according to the cover letter.
Yeah.
So, Chapter 1. He reaps the bearded grain at a breath. Longfellow. The air reeked of sweat, booze, and desperation. Bodies bounced to the beat, banging loud and obnoxious from the DJ's sound system. Patrice shoved and sidestepped her way around the dance floor, pushing bodies aside like a butcher at the meat factory, plowing through the festering wound of desperation. Clusters broke apart and reformed with spontaneous timing. She didn't miss this life. Blunting out disappointment with alcohol brought only more regret and disillusionment in the morn. It became a merry-go-round of misery. Some got off under their own power. Others got off under death's strong suggestion. I like the merry-go-round of misery. That's a nice turn of phrase.
Yeah, I mean, the author's using very, very poetic language. You know, lots of metaphors and good rhythm to it. So, you know, I like language that is.
It's evocative.
Yeah, there we go.
Excuse me. Aye, you got a man? The man to her right gave her the once-over, drinking her in with his eyes. He grinned, revealing gold teeth and well-oiled lips. She let her disgust roll forward in her face. In the flashing, multicolored lights and sporadic darkness, he may have missed it. You ain't gonna talk to me? Oh, come on. Damn, at least smile. He laughed, forced with a hint of embarrassment and perhaps marijuana. His body language spoke to an immaturity and low self-esteem she'd observed in other grown men that hung out at places like this, preying on those praying for companionship.
Yeah, again, that's nice.
Mm-hmm. And I have a sense of place. The only thing I don't have yet is what she's doing there or expecting to find.
They've set
I
up
think
that.
that's going to come because it's smoothly presented. It's easy for me to read. It's not giving me any kind of jarring sensations as I read it.
Yep.
So I would read more of this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing is that this author did not provide a synopsis. So we can't turn to that to see if we got to a point where we said, I'm not so sure. We don't have that additional piece of information to help us decide whether to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, you know, we don't say we require a synopsis, but we prefer, strongly prefer, to get a completed manuscript and a synopsis.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, this again is a set aside and keep reading. At some point, this evocative language might be a drag on the story, and if
it interrupts
yeah.
action, if things are happening, but then suddenly in the middle of something happening, we're off describing other things, that tends to take me out of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, although just looking here on the second page, we've got we have the fantasy element is introduced. Ever since 6 years old, she'd been able to locate things, people and whatnot. Even now, her gut burned as she approached him. So we have the magic introduced. We have the magical indicator. We have a system right there. And we have her mission. So that's just perhaps he knew tonight was his last one. Bing bang boom. All of it is introduced at exactly the right time and with good pacing to it. So yeah. I think this bodes well, and we would keep reading. It is, to my mind, at 65,000 words too short. So the question would be is if we liked the 65,000 words that we had, we could either suggest to the author a way to expand it, or ask for a related thematically story in the same universe with the same characters
that we could package together.
That would give us the wordage that as a printed book you want to get to have a satisfying heft to it. And the readers won't feel cheated by too short an experience. So,
all right, our last one for this session, and we're just now at the 1 hour mark, which is we didn't want to go much over an hour because that's a long time for people to watch something. Yeah. So I'm glad that this will be our last one. Yeah. Now this one looks a little odd. as you kind of look at this, and it's just the formatting is not at all what we generally would expect. But this book has been published online, which is part of why I took a lot of the identifying information off of it. One thing that caught my attention is that there are several listings of lyrics used, citations for lyrics used, and each one ends with "all rights reserved," which is reserved to the copyright holder of the lyrics, and doesn't use the phrase "used by permission," which is very, very important in the copyright world. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, and it would be something that the author would need to make sure they have permission to use things that are still covered under copyright. That's why some of us who enjoy poetry and put them in our books tried very hard to use open source things that were no longer covered by copyright.
Things that are now in the public domain.
Yes.
So
that's the word I was trying, the phrase I was trying to come up with.
We get there eventually. So.
All right. So this is a science fiction story. We know that from, I knew that from the description in the online part.
Okay.
So chapter 1. We grow neither better or worse as we get old, but more like ourselves. May L. Becker. Not sure who that is, but
it's a nice little quote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Moses always hated this part. It wasn't the sensation that bothered him. There wasn't any. Nor was it the view. If one discounted the fact that the area seen through the face of the Thorne-Visser transitional cube was of a place light years away, it looked just like any other view of space. Boring. It was just the idea of it. A box of nothing, defined by pseudo-string of exotic matter. A cube of negative energy, Casimir space bound by superstring in theory to an identical box nearly 4 light years away. Not a wormhole as much as a back door, through which a step in the right direction moved you to a completely different star system. It kind of creeped Moses out.
All right, so I mean, we have our science fiction system explained right there.
And while I was getting a little bit lost in some of it, creeped Moses out, drew me back in.
Right.
That was enough to keep me going. And the passenger lounge of the Grissom was located on the forward edge of the #1 habitat ring. It's going to go into some more of the tech, which is not necessarily bad, but I do like to get to the character and the problem and what really forms the story. And so I would probably kind of skim a little bit over this. Someone asked, "Isn't it beautiful?" He didn't quite spew rum and coke through his nose. Fairly certain that he was the only person on the liner with enough interest to view the transition, Moses was startled by the pleasant feminine voice from behind him. He turned to look, grabbing a handrail as he did so to avoid spinning off into the lounge. Now there's a little more detail that puts me in the situation.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that kind of thing. I would probably read some more of this.
Yeah. Checking the boxes, we have a sense of, we clearly know what genre we're in. It feels like a hard science fiction or some sort of science fiction adventure. I don't know if I like this character yet, and that's okay. I don't need to know yet. But I will be spending, potentially I'm spending several hours with this person. So whether I like the main character or not will figure into the final disposition of the novel. I'm not drawn in yet. I'm not intrigued yet. But there's also nothing in here that would stop me from reading and give it what I like to call the line of doom.
And if we had a little bit more time, we might actually read some more of that one right now.
Yeah.
We do have a question that came in
Okay.
while I was reading that, and it said, you said that one was published online.
Yeah.
Does that indicate you're open to acquiring previously independently published works? And the answer to that is yes, we have done so.
We have.
And the best example of that is Larry Correa's Monster Hunter International, which he published himself and then was called to Toni's attention by the bookstore owner.
Mm-hmm.
And now he, of course, is one of our flagship authors. We do not automatically exclude self-published work, but we don't necessarily seek it out.
We don't. I think ideally it would be a new work, perhaps.
Related to ones that have already been.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So something that we could that we could contribute to getting to a larger audience. So rather than taking an audience that's already there, we would want to take a new product and move it forward. So so the answer is no, it's not automatically excluded, but if we can get something new, we would prefer new. So.
Any final thoughts before we say goodbye to the folks who have been with us and the folks who might watch this later on?
No, I think we didn't spill anything on any of the manuscripts, so I think we're doing good. Yeah, yeah. So.
All right. With that, I'll just say thank you very much for being with us here. You'll see on the screen there that if you want to submit your science fiction or fantasy novel, we do ask you to check out our guidelines and follow them to your best ability at Baen.com. And we've enjoyed spending this time with you. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up down at the bottom. And if you are available, come back in a few hours for part 2.